The National Mall. Great views, beautiful museums, America's front lawn, and home to a forgotten Civil War medical facility. Let's talk about the history of Armory Square Hospital. At the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, there were very few medical facilities in Washington. None could handle the huge swell of sick and wounded soldiers who needed treatment as volunteer soldiers swarmed into the Union Capitol in the Civil War's early months. Early Civil War medicine was a makeshift affair. Patients were often treated in churches, schools, and in government buildings, like the U.S. Capitol, right over there. It quickly became apparent to the U.S. Army and to the Lincoln administration that these makeshift facilities would not do. They were often dank, dark spaces with little airflow that did little to encourage the health and recovery of patients. And so the U.S. government embarked on a massive building project starting in 1862. Hospitals were to be constructed throughout Washington, most completed in the approved pavilion-style model. Built to encourage airflow and cleanliness to allow hospital staff easy access to fresh water, food, and cleaning facilities, and to manage influxes of patients. Most of the sites were to be located on hills on the outskirts of the city where fresh air and breezes were most prevalent and away from the stench and the bad air of downtown Washington. There was to be one exception to this rule, however. There needed to be a hospital close to the city docks on the Potomac River in southwest Washington. This is where most of the wounded and sick were brought in for military campaigns in Virginia via steamships or across the Long Bridge from Arlington, Virginia. This facility was built to care for the most severely wounded or sick who were brought into this city, those who may not have survived the bumpy ride in horse-drawn ambulances to the hospitals on the city's outskirts. For this purpose, the government chose the site of the Columbian Armory at 6th Street and B Street Southwest, now known as Independence Avenue. This location was already dedicated to military use, being a large building that stored weaponry and ammunition for the DC militia before the Civil War. The site was located adjacent to a clear area of land that lay on a flat piece of ground beneath the yet unfinished United States Capitol. In this space, now the National Mall, a fetid canal ran and cattle roamed. This green space was chosen as the site of a new hospital, which was named for the Armory ground around which it was built. The hospital opened its doors in 1862. It consisted of 12 hospital wards, known as pavilions, constructed in a layout intended to allow for fresh air to enter the wards. Inside these wards, 1,000 beds were made available, and a space for emergency tent hospitals were available in case of a mass casualty influx from a severe battle or from a disease outbreak. Armory Square was staffed by a professional group of doctors and nurses who oversaw the care of the patients at Armory Square. Among those working in the hospital were some notable people. The hospital's chief surgeon was a physician named Dr. Willard Bliss, a surgeon from Ohio who joined the Army shortly after the Civil War began. Bliss quickly rose through the ranks and was promoted to serve as a chief of hospitals here in Washington. He oversaw the construction of Armory Square and oversaw care within its whitewashed walls for most of the Civil War. Bliss gained infamy after the Civil War by botching the medical care for President James Garfield, who was assassinated just across the National Mall from where Armory Square Hospital stood, at the 6th Street Railroad Station. Another figure who stands out in the history of Armory Square Hospital is Amanda Aiken Stearns. She served as a nurse in Ward E at the hospital in 1863 and 1864. Her account of life in Armory Square Hospital was published in the years after the Civil War. It shows her and her colleagues' tireless work to care for the patients in their care. In the preface to her 1909 book about her time in Armory Square Hospital, she referred to the facility as, quote, the best conducted institution of its kind during the Civil War. Other notable medical professionals, authors, politicians, and figures passed through the wards of Armory Square to oversee the medical care, visit with the wounded, and comfort the dying. These included poet Walt Whitman, who often volunteered time to write letters for the wounded and the sick, and President Lincoln, whose visits Amanda Aiken Stearns often noted. Of these presidential visits, Stearns wrote, quote, "He came often to visit the hospital and shake hands with the soldiers, always with a kind word, when his eyes had a sad, faraway look, and he often paused before those suffering most intensely to offer a warm, "God bless you." Thousands of patients passed through Armory Square Hospital during the Civil War. These severely wounded and desperately ill patients were often treated for weeks or months in the facility. Many never left its wards alive. Civil War cemeteries in and around Washington, including Arlington National Cemetery, became the final resting place for many of the patients of Armory Square Hospital. For those who were on the road to recovery, however, Armory Square Hospital became a hub of life. They had a band to play cheering tunes and celebrate holidays and patriotic occasions. A hospital newspaper was published, the Armory Square Hospital Gazette. Visitors and relief organizations showered the patients with special foods, reading materials, and other items meant to boost their morale and lift their spirits in their hour of peril. The facility operated from 1862 until the summer of 1865. During its use, it saw mass casualty influxes from the battles of Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, and the Battle of Cold Harbor, along with countless other smaller engagements, and also from disease outbreaks here in Washington from things like dysentery and typhoid fever. The hospital closed its doors for the final time in August 1865. The wooden wards were pulled down and the hospital's amenities and equipment were sold for scrap. Despite its removal from the physical landscape of the capital, the memory of Armory Square Hospital lived on through the recollections of the doctors, nurses, hospital volunteers, and the patients who were treated here. The Armory itself remained well into the 20th century. This site became home to temporary buildings used during World War I and World War II as offices for the War Department. In the 1960s, the site was cleared and the Armory demolished to make way for Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. The Air and Space Museum stands on the site of Armory Square Hospital today. Unfortunately, very little remains on site today to tell the story of life and death that took place on this ground during the American Civil War. I'm Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. Thank you for watching this video today. If you enjoyed the video, please go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe button to see more videos like this. We'll see you next time.